They tried to erase him from history. You know the name Wiggins. You see Andrew holding the trophy, signing the multi-million-dollar contracts. But before the son became a champion, the father was a ghost. In the mid-'80s, Mitchell Wiggins wasn't just a player. He was the secret weapon of the only team that terrified the Chicago Bulls. The Houston Rockets were built to destroy dynasties. They had the size, the swagger, and the talent to rule the decade. But overnight, it all vanished. This isn't just a story about a basketball ban, it's a story about a purge. In 1987, at the height of the league's wildest era, Mitchell Wiggins was singled out, exiled, and branded with a scarlet letter, while others looked the other way. He lost his prime. He lost his fortune. He became the dark secret of the NBA, so his son could eventually become its shining star. Ask yourself this: if the league hadn't pulled the trigger on Mitchell Wiggins, would Michael Jordan really have 6 rings? The official history books say yes. The truth says something very different. We are about to open the file they wanted closed forever. To understand the fall, you have to understand the climb. Mitchell Wiggins was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was born in Griffin, North Carolina, a place where you had to scrap for everything you wanted. From a young age, it was clear that Mitchell was different. He was not just talented, he was hungry. And I do not mean that metaphorically. There was a fire in him, a desperate need to prove that he belonged, that he was better than anyone gave him credit for. When he arrived at Florida State University, he was not the flashiest player on the floor. He was not the guy doing windmills in warm-ups to impress the girls. He was a worker. He was a grinder. His game was built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated effort. At 6 feet and 4 inches, he was a guard who played with the physicality of a forward. He could score, yes. He averaged over 20 points a game in his senior year. But it was how he scored that mattered. He did not dance around you, he went through you. He was aggressive. He attacked the rim with a ferocity that made defenders think twice about stepping in his way. Scouts called him the man from Griffin, and the nickname carried a sense of respect. It implied toughness. It implied that this was a man who did not back down from a fight. But there was something else bubbling under the surface. This intense drive, this inability to turn off the motor, it was a double-edged sword. On the court, it made him relentless. It made him a nightmare to guard. But off the court? When the lights went down and the adrenaline was still pumping through his veins, that same hunger needed to be fed. In the early '80s, the world was opening up to young athletes in ways that were both exciting and dangerous. Mitchell was leaving the structured life of college for the wild frontier of professional sports, and he was bringing all that ambition and intensity with him. He was ready to conquer the world. But he had no idea that the world was setting a trap for him. He was forging a character of steel, but even steel can break if you apply the wrong kind of pressure. The date was June 28, 1983. The location was Madison Square Garden in New York City. The air was thick with smoke and anticipation. This was the NBA draft. It was the night that changed lives instantly. For a young man from North Carolina, hearing his name called was the validation of every drop of sweat he had left on the asphalt courts of Griffin. The class of '83 is legendary for one reason: Ralph Sampson. The 7'4" phenomenon was the consensus #1 pick, the man who was supposed to revolutionize the game. But deeper in the draft, teams were looking for soldiers. They were looking for the guys who would do the dirty work. With the 23rd pick in the first round, the Indiana Pacers selected Mitchell Wiggins. Being a first-round pick is a badge of honor. It means you are one of the elite. It guarantees a contract. It guarantees money. But the business of basketball is cold, and Mitchell learned that lesson almost immediately. Before he could even unpack his bags in Indiana, he was on the move. He was traded to the Chicago Bulls. Now, you have to understand something very important here. This was not the Chicago Bulls of the 90s. There were no banners hanging in the rafters. There was no statue outside the arena. In 1983, the Bulls were a struggling franchise trying to find an identity. Mitchell Wiggins arrived in Chicago a year before Michael Jordan. Think about that for a second. He was there at ground zero. He walked into a locker room that was desperate for a spark, and he provided it. As a rookie, he showed flashes of brilliance. He averaged around 12 points a game, proving that his college game translated perfectly to the pros. He was quick, he was strong, and he was fearless. He looked like a foundational piece, a guy who could be a starter in this league for 10 years. He was living the dream. He had the money, he had the fame, and he was playing in one of the biggest cities in America. But Chicago in the 80s was also a playground for the rich and famous, a city with a nightlife that never slept. For a young man with cash in his pocket and a feeling of invincibility, the temptations were everywhere. He had punched his ticket to the big leagues, but he was about to find out that the ride could get very bumpy very fast. The 1984 season in Chicago is one of those moments in time where the tectonic plates of the basketball universe shifted violently. Mitchell Wiggins was coming off a solid rookie campaign. He had proven he belonged. But then, the Chicago Bulls drafted a skinny kid from North Carolina named Michael Jordan. Suddenly, the air in the city changed. It became electric. For Mitchell, this was a complicated reality. On one hand, he was teammates with the most exciting player the league had ever seen. On the other, he was a shooting guard on a team that had just drafted the ultimate shooting guard. Training camp in '84 was a war zone. You have to understand the mindset of professional athletes. Mitchell Wiggins was not about to just roll over and hand his spot to a rookie, no matter how high that rookie could jump. Reports from those early practices describe a level of intensity that bordered on combat. Wiggins was tough, physical, and defensive-minded. He pushed Jordan. He made Jordan work. And in return, Jordan made everyone realize that the hierarchy had changed forever. They played together in the backcourt for a stretch, a fascinating what-if scenario that most fans have completely forgotten. Imagine a world where the Bulls kept Wiggins as Jordan's running mate, two relentless, slashing guards terrorizing defenses. But the front office in Chicago had to make a choice. The salary cap was a real thing, and rosters had limits. They saw Wiggins as a valuable asset, perhaps too valuable to sit on the bench behind Jordan, or perhaps they saw a redundancy. He was a scorer who needed the ball, and the ball now belonged to Michael. So, midway through the season, the call came down. Mitchell Wiggins was traded to the Houston Rockets. At the time, it felt like a business move, a simple shuffling of the deck. But looking back, it was the moment Mitchell Wiggins stepped out of the shadow of a rising god and into a situation that promised him something even better, a legitimate chance at a championship ring right now. He packed his bags, left the Windy City, and headed south, leaving behind the man who would become the face of the sport, unaware that he was walking into a team destined for greatness and tragedy. When Mitchell Wiggins landed in Houston, he walked into a laboratory where basketball scientists were trying to create the perfect team. They called it the Twin Towers era. You had Hakeem Olajuwon, a dream of a player with footwork like a ballerina and the power of a heavyweight boxer. And you had Ralph Sampson, a 7'4" unicorn who could dribble like a guard. It was unfair. It was a cheat code before video games even existed. But a team cannot survive on giants alone. They needed guards who could feed the post, defend the perimeter, and score when the defense collapsed on the big men. Enter Mitchell Wiggins and Lewis Lloyd. If Olajuwon and Sampson were the clean-cut faces of the franchise, Wiggins and Lloyd were the gritty, street-smart soul of the team. Lewis Lloyd, known as Black Magic, was a playground legend from Philadelphia. He was wild, creative, and unpredictable. Mitchell Wiggins was the perfect complement. He became the team's microwave, a player who could come off the bench cold and instantly heat up the game. He provided instant offense. He was the energy guy. When the starters were tired, Wiggins would come in and run the opposition into the ground. The chemistry was undeniable. The Rockets of the mid-'80s were not just a basketball team, they were a traveling rock band. They played fast, they played loud, and they played with a swagger that intimidated opponents before the tip-off. Wiggins found his role. He wasn't the star, and he didn't need to be. He was the closer. He was the guy you trusted in the fourth quarter to get a tough bucket or make a crucial stop. He and Lloyd formed a bond that went deeper than basketball. They were the dynamic duo of the backcourt, brothers in arms who navigated the high-pressure world of the NBA together. They shared the accolades, the victories, and as we would later find out, they shared the secrets that would eventually bring the whole house of cards crashing down. The 1985-86 season is the holy grail for Houston Rockets historians. It was the year everything clicked. The team won 51 games, but numbers do not tell the story. The story is about the playoffs. The Western Conference Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers is widely considered one of the greatest series ever played. The Lakers were the defending champions. They had Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, James Worthy. They were Hollywood royalty. The Rockets were just the upstarts from Texas. But Mitchell Wiggins and the Rockets did not care about reputations. They punched the Lakers in the mouth. Wiggins was instrumental in that run. His defense on the Lakers' guards was suffocating. He chased Magic Johnson, he hounded Byron Scott. And then came the moment that is frozen in time, Ralph Sampson's buzzer beater in Game 5 to knock out the Lakers. The forum went silent. The Rockets had done the impossible. They had dethroned the Kings. They were heading to the NBA Finals to face the Boston Celtics. This was it, the pinnacle. Mitchell Wiggins was playing for the championship of the world. The finals against the Celtics were a brawl. Larry Bird against the Twin Towers. The Celtics were widely regarded as one of the greatest teams in history, playing at home in the Boston Garden, a place where visiting teams went to die. But the Rockets fought. They pushed the series to 6 games. Wiggins had moments of brilliance, scoring 16 points in a crucial Game 5 win. He showed the world that he was not just a role player, he was a legitimate threat on the biggest stage. They lost the series in Game 6, but as the confetti fell on Larry Bird, the feeling in the Houston locker room was not despair. It was hunger. They were young. They were talented. They had just taken the best team in history to 6 games. Everyone, from the experts to the fans, said the same thing. The Rockets are the team of the 90s. Their time is coming. It was a beautiful lie. They thought they were at the beginning of a dynasty. In reality, they were standing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground was about to give way. To truly understand what happened next, you have to take off the rose-colored glasses of nostalgia and look at the 1980s for what they really were. It was a decade of excess. Wall Street was booming, shoulder pads were huge, and the party never stopped. In the NBA, the game was fast, the shorts were short, and the lifestyle was, let's just call it, accelerated. There was an unspoken rule in the league: play hard, party harder. And at the center of that party scene was a substance. It was white, it was expensive, and it was everywhere. They called it nose candy, stardust, or simply the rich man's aspirin. It was the fuel of the high life, a status symbol that whispered promises of energy and invincibility. For young men with pockets full of cash and adrenaline to burn, the temptation was not just a knock on the door, it was a sledgehammer breaking it down. You have to remember, this was before the internet, before camera phones. What happened in the VIP room stayed in the VIP room, or so they thought. The league knew it had a problem. Estimates from that era suggest that a terrifying percentage of the league was dabbling in this recreational activity. It was an epidemic, silent but deadly, eating away at the foundation of the sport. But for the most part, it was swept under the rug. The show had to go on. The TV ratings were climbing. Why ruin the party? But then the world stopped turning. In June of 1986, just days after being drafted by the Boston Celtics, a young phenom named Len Bias collapsed in a dorm room and never woke up. His heart stopped. The cause? An overdose of that same white powder. It was a tragedy that shook America to its core. Suddenly, the harmless party favor was revealed as a killer. The mood shifted instantly. The public was outraged. Congress was getting involved. The NBA, desperate to protect its image as a family-friendly product, decided that the era of looking the other way was over. They needed to send a message. They needed to show that they were cleaning house. And they needed someone to make an example of. The storm clouds were gathering over Houston, but Mitchell Wiggins and Lewis Lloyd were too busy enjoying the ride to notice the thunder. The 1986-87 season was supposed to be the coronation. The Rockets were the favorites. They had the experience of the finals behind them. They had the talent. But something was rotten in the state of Texas. The team was winning, yes, but the chemistry was fraying. There were whispers, rumors of late nights and missed practices. On the court, Wiggins was having his best statistical season yet. He was averaging over 15 points a game. He was explosive. He was playing for a big contract. He looked like a man on a mission. But off the court, the shadow was growing longer. It all came crashing down on a Monday in January. It wasn't a gradual decline. It was a guillotine drop. The news broke like a bomb. Mitchell Wiggins and Lewis Lloyd, the dynamic duo of the Rockets' backcourt, had tested positive for a banned substance, not steroids, not performance enhancers. It was the White Lady. The details were murky, but the implication was clear. They weren't just users, they were deep in it. The investigation revealed that this wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a lifestyle. The reaction in Houston was one of pure shock. Fans felt betrayed. How could they? They had the world at their feet. Why throw it all away for a momentary high? The locker room was devastated. Hakeem Olajuwon, a man of deep faith and discipline, lost two of his key soldiers overnight. The Twin Towers suddenly looked very lonely without their guards. The local press went for the throat. They painted Wiggins not as a victim of addiction, but as a villain who had sabotaged the city's dreams. The narrative shifted from championship contenders to a team in crisis. And for Mitchell Wiggins, the man who had fought so hard to escape the obscurity of Griffin, the spotlight turned into an interrogation lamp. He was no longer the exciting young guard. He was a cautionary tale, a headline in the police blotter section of the sports page. Then came the hammer. David Stern, the commissioner of the NBA, was a man who understood marketing better than anyone. He knew that to save the league's image after the Len Bias tragedy, he had to be ruthless. He couldn't just fine them. He couldn't just suspend them for a few games. He had to drop the nuclear option. The verdict was handed down swiftly and mercilessly. Mitchell Wiggins and Lewis Lloyd were banned from the NBA. Not for a year, not for a season, indefinitely. With a minimum of 2.5 years before they could even apply for reinstatement. Let that sink in. 2.5 years. In the life of a professional athlete, that is an eternity. It is the difference between a prime and retirement. It is the difference between millions of dollars and zero. It was, effectively, a death sentence for their careers. The severity of the punishment stunned everyone. There were other players caught with the same substance who received slaps on the wrist, rehab assignments, or short suspensions. Why Wiggins? Why Lloyd? Conspiracy theorists, and there are plenty in Houston, will tell you that the league needed a scapegoat. They needed a high-profile sacrifice to appease the politicians and the sponsors. The Rockets were a convenient target. They weren't the Lakers or the Celtics. They were expendable. Mitchell Wiggins was cast out. One day he was flying on private jets and signing autographs. The next, he was a pariah. He was stripped of his salary, his status, and his dignity. The league erased him. He wasn't allowed to practice with the team. He wasn't allowed in the arena. He was a ghost. Can you imagine the psychological toll? To sit at home and watch your team, your friends, struggle on television, knowing that you are the reason they are failing? Knowing that you have the talent to help them, but you are forbidden from stepping on the floor? It was a punishment designed to break a man, and for a long time it looked like it had succeeded. But as we will see, Mitchell Wiggins was made of tougher stuff than anyone gave him credit for. The ban was meant to be the end of the story. But for Mitchell, it was just the beginning of a long, lonely walk through the desert. Imagine the silence. You are 27 years old. You are in the absolute physical prime of your life. Your body is a machine built for one purpose, to play basketball at the highest level. And suddenly the phone stops ringing, the checks stop coming. The friends who were so eager to buy you drinks and shake your hand, they vanish into the woodwork. Mitchell Wiggins was not just unemployed, he was radioactive. In the late 80s, being banned for a substance violation was a mark of Cain. It was a scarlet letter that scared away sponsors, agents, and even casual acquaintances. For 2.5 agonizing years, Mitchell Wiggins lived in a purgatory that few can understand. He didn't just sit on a couch, he couldn't. The hunger that drove him out of North Carolina was still there, burning a hole in his chest. To keep food on the table and to keep his sanity intact, he had to descend from the bright lights of the NBA arenas to the dimly lit, drafty gymnasiums of the minor leagues. He played in the Continental Basketball Association. He played in the United States Basketball League. These were places where the bus rides were long, the pay was pitiful, and the floors were hard. But for Mitchell, it was a lifeline. It was the only place where he wasn't the guy who got banned. He was just a hooper. But let's be real about the psychological warfare he was enduring. Every time he stepped onto those second-tier courts, he was dominating players who would never sniff the NBA. He was dropping 40 points, 50 points. It was like watching a lion hunt mice. It proved he still had it, but it also served as a cruel reminder of what he had lost. While his former teammates were flying first class and playing on national television, Mitchell was washing his own jersey in a motel sink. The financial strain was immense. NBA contracts in the 80s weren't the guaranteed fortunes they are today. Losing 2 prime earning years was catastrophic. He had to battle the demons that put him there in the first place, all while watching his bank account dwindle and the world move on without him. It was a test of character that would have broken a lesser man. While Mitchell Wiggins was fighting for his basketball life in the wilderness, the franchise he left behind was slowly suffocating. The Houston Rockets of 1987 and 88 are a case study in what could have been. Without their explosive backcourt, the team lost its identity. Hakeem Olajuwon was still magnificent, a force of nature that the league had no answer for, but he was isolated. He was like a general without an army. The spacing on the floor disappeared. Defenses could collapse on him with impunity because there was no Mitchell Wiggins slashing to the rim or hitting the mid-range jumper to make them pay. The tragedy was compounded by the physical decline of Ralph Sampson. The other twin tower began to crumble under the weight of injuries. His knees, his back, his body betrayed him. Suddenly, the team that was supposed to rule the decade was fighting just to make the playoffs. They were bounced in the first round. They were mediocre. The dynasty had lasted exactly one season. Fans in Houston watched in horror as the Lakers and Celtics continued to rack up titles, knowing deep down that their team had the talent to be right there with them. The frustration in the city was palpable. You could hear it on sports talk radio. You could feel it in the Summit Arena. Hakeem Olajuwon, usually a stoic figure, began to show cracks in his armor. He was frustrated. He was doing everything humanly possible, putting up monster numbers, but it wasn't enough. He needed help. He needed a guard who could create his own shot. He needed Mitchell Wiggins. The absence of Wiggins and Lloyd created a vacuum that the Rockets tried desperately to fill with role players and journeymen, but you cannot replace a Ferrari with a station wagon. The chemistry was gone. The swagger was gone. The Rockets became a cautionary tale, a team that flew too close to the sun and got burned by its own internal combustion. The band didn't just punish two players, it punished an entire city and robbed the NBA of one of its greatest rivalries. 1989. The exile was finally over. The NBA, perhaps realizing that the punishment had been served, and then some, reinstated Mitchell Wiggins. But reinstatement is not the same as redemption. When the news broke that the Rockets were bringing him back, the reaction was mixed. There was excitement, sure. People remembered the microwave. They remembered the finals run. But there was also deep skepticism. 2.5 years is a lifetime in professional sports. Could he still play? Was he clean? Was he worth the risk? The pressure on Mitchell Wiggins entering the 1989-90 season was suffocating. He wasn't just fighting for a roster spot, he was fighting for his name. He was fighting to prove that he wasn't a junkie, that he wasn't a failure. He had to earn every minute of playing time. Coach Don Chaney, a man who valued defense and discipline, watched him like a hawk. Every mistake, every missed assignment was scrutinized. Is he rusty? Is he distracted? The whispers were always there. But then the game started. And something incredible happened. Mitchell Wiggins didn't just come back. He came back with a vengeance. He looked faster, stronger, and more determined than ever before. It was as if all the frustration, all the anger, and all the shame of the past 30 months were being channeled into every dribble and every shot. In his first season back, he averaged over 15 points per game off the bench. He was a man possessed. He attacked the rim with a fury that bordered on violence. He was arguably the best sixth man in the entire league. The crowd in Houston, initially cautious, fell in love with him all over again. They saw a man who had been to hell and walked back. They saw a survivor. When he checked into the game, the energy in the building shifted. The microwave was plugged back in, and he was cooking. The 1989-90 season stands as a monument to what Mitchell Wiggins truly was, an unguardable force of nature. While the Houston Rockets were struggling to find their new identity in the post-Ralph Sampson era, Wiggins was playing the best basketball of his life. He appeared in 66 games that season. He started very few, but he finished almost all of them. He averaged 15.5 points per game in just 28 minutes of action. If you extrapolate those numbers to a starter's workload, you are looking at a 25-point-per-game scorer. He was efficient. He was relentless. He shot nearly 49% from the field, a staggering number for a guard who lived in the chaotic traffic of the paint. But there was a bitter irony to this individual brilliance. While Mitchell was lighting up the scoreboard, the team around him was stuck in neutral. The Rockets finished with a 41-41 record, the very definition of mediocrity. The Twin Towers dream was dead and buried. It was now the Hakeem Olajuwon show, and Mitchell Wiggins was the only co-star worthy of sharing the stage. Yet, despite his production, despite proving that the band had not eroded his skills, the tension was palpable. Mitchell was playing for his future. He was a free agent at the end of the season. He wanted to be paid like the elite scorer he had proven to be. He wanted security. He wanted the years back that the league had stolen from him. The front office, however, saw things differently. They saw a 30-year-old guard with a troubled past. They saw a liability. Negotiations were tense. It was a classic clash between business and redemption. Mitchell felt he had paid his debt to society and to the franchise. He had returned, he had kept his nose clean, and he had performed. But in the summer of 1990, the Rockets made a cold calculation. They decided not to meet his demands. They let him walk. After everything, the draft, the rise, the ban, the return, his time in Houston ended not with a bang, but with a contract dispute. The man who could have been a franchise cornerstone was once again looking for a home, a victim of a league that forgives but never forgets. After the door slammed shut in Houston, Mitchell Wiggins found himself in a strange limbo. The 1991 season came and went, and he was nowhere to be found on an NBA roster. It seemed the league was done with him, but Mitchell was not done with the game. He refused to let his career die in silence. He kept training. He kept pushing. And finally, in the 91-92 season, a lifeline appeared from the city of brotherly love. The Philadelphia 76ers called. This was a fascinating, albeit brief, chapter. Philadelphia was Charles Barkley's team. It was a squad of tough, gritty veterans. On paper, Wiggins fit perfectly. He was a warrior. But the reality was harsh. He was now 32 years old. The 2 years of exile and the year of inactivity had taken a subtle toll. The explosiveness was still there in flashes, but the consistency was waning. He played 49 games for the Sixers, averaging just over 4 points a game. He was a role player, a devastating demotion for a man who had just averaged 15 a night in Houston. The fit wasn't right. The minutes weren't there. And as the season wound down, Mitchell Wiggins realized a painful truth. His time as an NBA star was over. The league had moved on. The bad boys era was ending, the Bulls dynasty was beginning, and there was no room for a relic of the mid-'80s scandal. So he did what many misunderstood geniuses do. He went to Europe. But he didn't just go to play, he went to conquer. He landed in Greece, a place where basketball is not just a sport, but a religion. The Greek League in the 90s was a wild frontier. The arenas were filled with smoke, flares, and fanatics who would die for their team. It was intense. It was chaotic. And Mitchell Wiggins loved it. He signed with Milan and then later with Sporting. In the NBA, he was a role player. In Greece, he was Michael Jordan. He was a god. If you want to understand the tragedy of Mitchell Wiggins, you have to look at his stats in the Greek League. He didn't just play well, he obliterated the competition. In the 1993 season, playing for Milan, he averaged, hold on to your seats, 36 points per game. 36. He led the league in scoring, beating out other NBA exiles and European legends. He was unstoppable. He was faster, stronger, and smarter than anyone on the court. He was dropping 40, 50 points like it was a layup drill. The Greek fans worshipped him. They chanted his name. For the first time in years, Mitchell Wiggins was appreciated. He was the man. But there was a hollowness to this triumph. While he was being carried off the court on the shoulders of fans in Athens, back home in America, the Houston Rockets were finally climbing the mountain. In June of 1994, Hakeem Olajuwon lifted the Larry O'Brien Trophy. The Rockets were champions, without Mitchell, without Lewis Lloyd. It is impossible to imagine the mix of emotions Wiggins must have felt watching that on a television screen thousands of miles away. Joy for his friend Hakeem? Absolutely. But also a crushing, suffocating sense of what if. That ring should have been on his finger. That parade should have been for him. He was the best player in Europe, but he was playing in exile. He was a king, without a kingdom. The narrative in the U.S. had shifted completely to Hakeem's greatness, and Wiggins was just a footnote, a trivia question. Who was the other guard on the '86 team? This period of his life was defined by this brutal contrast, professional dominance and personal obscurity. He was making good money, he was a star in his own right, but he was playing in the shadow of the dynasty he helped build, but was forbidden to lead. He was the Phantom of the Opera, singing his aria to an audience that didn't matter to the history books of the NBA. The mid-'90s were a strange time for Mitchell Wiggins. While his former team, the Houston Rockets, was busy cementing its legacy with back-to-back NBA championships, Mitchell was truly a man without a country. He had conquered Greece, proving he could still score at will, but the NBA phone remained silent. The league had moved on. They were looking for the next Grant Hill, the next Penny Hardaway. They weren't looking for a 35-year-old guard with a checkered past, no matter how much game he had left in the tank. So Mitchell Wiggins became a basketball mercenary. He became a wandering Ronin, selling his sword, or rather, his jump shot, to the highest bidder. He packed his bags for France, signing with Limoges. Then he took his talents to the Philippines. Now, you have to understand something about basketball in the Philippines. It is a spectacle. The fans are passionate, the games are physical, and American imports are expected to be superheroes. Mitchell didn't disappoint. In the PBA, Philippine Basketball Association, playing for Tanduay, he was putting up video game numbers. We are talking about games where scoring 40 or 50 points was just another Tuesday. He was a giant among men, physically and skillfully superior to almost everyone on the court. But there is a sadness to this part of the story. Here was a man who had guarded Michael Jordan, who had battled Larry Bird in the NBA Finals, now running up and down courts in Manila, thousands of miles away from the spotlight he deserved. Was it for the love of the game? Absolutely. Mitchell Wiggins breathed basketball, but let's be honest, it was also about survival. It was about the paycheck. The ban had cost him his prime earning years in the NBA, and he had a family to feed. He squeezed every last drop out of his body, playing until the wheels literally fell off. He played until nearly the turn of the millennium, long after most of his draft class had retired to comfortable desk jobs or coaching gigs. He refused to let the game retire him. He retired the game on his own terms, in obscurity, but with his pride intact. When Mitchell Wiggins finally hung up his sneakers, he didn't just fade into the background. He began the most important project of his life. And to understand this project, you have to meet the other half of the equation, Marita Payne. This is where the story shifts from a tragedy to a science fiction movie about genetics. Marita wasn't just a basketball wife. She was an elite, world-class athlete, a sprinter, a two-time Olympic silver medalist for Canada in 1984. She was fast, she was explosive, and she was a competitor. Think about that combination for a second. You have Mitchell Wiggins, 6'4", long arms, defensive grit, high basketball IQ, and NBA-level scoring ability. Then you have Marita Payne, blazing speed, fast-twitch muscle fibers, and Olympic discipline. When they decided to start a family, they weren't just having kids. They were creating the ultimate athletic prototypes. They settled in Vaughan, Ontario, just north of Toronto. Why Canada? Maybe it was to be close to Marita's roots. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a strategic retreat. Canada in the early 2000s was not the basketball hotbed it is today. It was quiet. It was safe. It was far away from the prying eyes of the American media and the bad influences that had derailed Mitchell's career. It was in this quiet suburban environment that Mitchell Wiggins transitioned from player to architect. He looked at his sons, Mitchell Jr., Nick, and the youngest Andrew, and he saw the potential to rewrite history. He saw a second chance, but he knew that talent wasn't enough. He had talent, and look where it got him. He knew that to survive in the shark tank of professional sports, you needed armor. And he was going to forge that armor himself, in the backyard, away from the cameras. There are fathers who play catch with their sons in the park, and then there is Mitchell Wiggins. The training regimen he installed for his boys was not for the faint of heart. It was a boot camp. Locals in Vaughan still tell stories about seeing the Wiggins brothers running hills, doing drills, and working on their handles long after the sun went down. Mitchell wasn't just teaching them how to shoot a basketball, he was teaching them how to be professionals before they were even teenagers. Andrew, in particular, was the chosen one. You could see it early. He had his mother's fluidity and his father's length. He moved like water. But Mitchell knew that smooth could easily be mistaken for soft. He was relentless with Andrew. He pushed him. He critiqued him. He was the voice in Andrew's ear saying, "That's not good enough." Some people called it hard parenting. Mitchell called it necessary preparation. He knew the traps that were waiting. He knew about the hangers-on, the fake friends, and the temptations of the night. He was determined to build a firewall around his son's mind. He constantly reminded Andrew of his own story. The band wasn't a secret in the Wiggins household. It was a lesson. "Don't be like me," was the subtext of every drill. "Be better than me." Mitchell poured all of his basketball knowledge, all of his what-ifs, and all of his unfulfilled ambition into Andrew. He wasn't living vicariously through his son. He was trying to save him. He shielded Andrew from the media hype as long as he could. When the American scouts started sniffing around, hearing whispers about a Canadian Jordan, Mitchell was the gatekeeper. He controlled the narrative. He kept the circle tight. He was determined that this time the Wiggins name would be associated with greatness, not scandal. And as Andrew grew taller, stronger, and more dominant, it looked like the plan was working to perfection. Fast forward to June 26, 2014, Barclays Center, Brooklyn. The atmosphere is electric. The NBA draft is about to begin, and the name on everyone's lips is Wiggins. But this time, it's Andrew. The boy from Vaughan has grown into a man. He is an athletic freak of nature. He is the consensus #1 pick. When Adam Silver walks to the podium and announces, "With the first pick in the 2014 NBA draft, the Cleveland Cavaliers select Andrew Wiggins," it is the culmination of a 20-year project. The cameras pan to the family table. There is Mitchell Wiggins. He is older now, his hair is graying, but the intensity in his eyes hasn't faded. He is watching his son shake the commissioner's hand, wearing a suit that screams "Star." For Mitchell, this moment is vindication. It is the universe finally balancing the scales. The league that kicked him out is now rolling out the red carpet for his bloodline. He has delivered the next LeBron, the Maple Jordan. The pride is palpable, but so is the wariness. Mitchell knows better than anyone that draft night is just the beginning of the shark attack. And true to the chaotic nature of the Wiggins legacy, the drama starts immediately. Andrew is drafted by Cleveland, the team where LeBron James has just returned. The narrative is perfect, the king and the prince. But the business of basketball is ruthless. Before Andrew can even play a single game in a Cavs jersey, he is traded. Shipped off to Minnesota for Kevin Love. It is a moment of déjà vu so strong it must have made Mitchell dizzy. 31 years earlier, Mitchell was drafted by Indiana and immediately traded to Chicago. Now, his son is drafted by Cleveland and immediately traded to the Timberwolves. The lesson is reinforced instantly. You are a commodity, son. Never get comfortable. Andrew goes from a contender to a rebuilding project in the frozen north, just like his father went from a playoff team to a project. The cycle of instability seemed destined to repeat itself. Watching Andrew Wiggins play in the NBA is like watching a ghost of Mitchell, but with a modern upgrade. The physical similarities are uncanny: the long arms, the smooth stride, the explosive leaping ability. But psychologically? They are polar opposites. Mitchell was a dog. He had to be. He was a second-round talent with a first-round motor. He played angry. He played desperate. Andrew? Andrew makes it look easy. Too easy sometimes. For years in Minnesota, the knock on Andrew was his motor. Critics said he disappeared in games. They said he didn't have that killer instinct. They called him overpaid after he signed his max contract. But Mitchell knew the truth. He had raised Andrew to be poised. He had raised him to be professional, to avoid the emotional highs and lows that had led Mitchell into the dark alleys of the 80s. Maybe he did his job too well. Did he scrub the dog out of the boy to save him from the bite? But then came the redemption arc that Mitchell never got, the trade to the Golden State Warriors. In 2022, Andrew Wiggins did exactly what his father did in '86. He became the pivotal piece on a championship team. He wasn't the star, that was Steph Curry, but he was the engine. He locked down Jason Tatum in the finals just like Mitchell used to lock down Magic Johnson. He grabbed rebounds in traffic. He hit big shots. And when the final buzzer sounded and Andrew held the Larry O'Brien trophy, it was a moment of profound healing for the family. Mitchell Wiggins, the man banned for life, the man erased from history, was now the father of an NBA champion. The circle was closed. The Wiggins name was no longer synonymous with scandal and wasted potential. It was now synonymous with winning. Now we have to stop and ask the question that haunts every Rockets fan over the age of 50. The question that keeps Hakeem Olajuwon awake at night: what if? What if Mitchell Wiggins and Lewis Lloyd had never touched that white powder? What if they had played the 1987 season? Let's look at the facts. The Rockets were coming off a finals appearance. They were young, they were hungry, the Lakers were aging, the Celtics were breaking down. If Mitchell Wiggins plays in '87, the Rockets have the depth to rest Ralph Sampson. Maybe his knees don't give out. Maybe the Twin Towers stay intact for another 3 or 4 years. With Wiggins averaging 20 points off the bench and playing elite defense, the Rockets are not just a playoff team, they are a juggernaut. Do the bad boy Pistons ever rise if they have to go through a healthy Houston? Does Michael Jordan win his first ring in '91 if he runs into a prime Hakeem and a veteran Wiggins in the finals? History is written by the victors, but it is shaped by the absences. The ban of Mitchell Wiggins didn't just ruin a career, it altered the timeline of the entire NBA. It created a power vacuum in the West that allowed the Lakers to squeeze out one more title and open the door for the Pistons. The Houston Rockets of the late '80s are the greatest dynasty that never was. They were a team dismantled not by opponents, but by the vices of the era. And Mitchell Wiggins stands at the center of that tragedy, a man who held the keys to the kingdom but dropped them in the dark. So here we are at the end of the road. We have traveled from the asphalt courts of North Carolina to the bright lights of the NBA Finals, down into the abyss of a 2.5-year ban, and back up to the mountaintop through the success of the next generation. The story of Mitchell Wiggins is not a simple sports biography. It is a Greek tragedy played out in sneakers. It is a story about how thin the line is between immortality and infamy. When you look at the landscape of the NBA today, you see a league that is forgiving. Players make mistakes, they get suspended, they apologize, and they come back. But Mitchell Wiggins lived in a different time. He was a casualty of a war on image that took no prisoners. He paid a price that was arguably far too steep for the crime. He lost his prime. He lost his legacy. He lost the chance to be mentioned in the same breath as the greats of the '80s. For decades, his name was a punchline, a warning whispered to rookies during rookie transition programs: don't end up like Mitchell Wiggins. But life, as they say, has a funny way of balancing the books. Mitchell didn't let the darkness consume him. He didn't become a bitter old man shouting at the television. He took that pain, that frustration, and he turned it into fuel. He poured everything he had left into his family. He built a laboratory in Canada and engineered a champion. When Andrew Wiggins held that trophy in 2022, he wasn't just winning it for the Golden State Warriors. He was winning it for the Wiggins name. He was scrubbing the stain off the legacy. Today, Mitchell Wiggins walks with his head high. He is no longer just the guy who got banned. He is the patriarch of a basketball royalty. But if you look closely in his eyes, you can still see the shadow. You can still see the what if. No amount of money, no amount of his son's success can ever truly replace the years that were stolen from him. He knows deep down that he was good enough. He knows he could have been a Hall of Famer. He knows that the Houston Rockets could have been a dynasty. That knowledge is a heavy burden to carry, a silent companion that walks with him every day. So the next time you see a highlight of the '86 Rockets, or the next time you see Andrew Wiggins throw down a dunk, remember the man in the shadows. Remember Mitchell Wiggins. Remember the player who was too electric for the league to handle and too human for the league to forgive. His story is a reminder that talent is a gift, but opportunity is a privilege, and it can be taken away in the blink of an eye. The NBA moved on, the fans moved on, but for Mitchell Wiggins, the game never really ended. It just changed courts. And in the end, maybe, just maybe, he won the most important game of all, the game of survival. This has been the secret history of the man the NBA tried to erase. But secrets, like talent, have a way of coming to light. Until next time, keep your eyes open, because the truth is always hiding in the margins.